Hi, class. It's Dr. St. Clair. This week we'll be talking about consumer markets and buying behavior. So we'll be discussing Chapter 5. Learning objectives are defining the consumer market. And we'll construct a simple model of consumer buying behavior. We'll explore the four major factors that influence the consumer buying behavior. We'll understand the stages in the buying decision process. And this is really important, so we'll spend some time on that as well. I mean, obviously, these are all important. Some we'll spend a little bit longer on. And we'll describe the adoption and diffusion process for new products. You've probably all seen the diffusion of innovation and the adoption curve. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If you haven't, well, you'll learn something new here. So beyond meat, we've all seen this alternative meat hit the market, and it's really gained some traction over the last few years. Significant, and we could debate about its efficacy, but as this product launched in grocery and fast food chains, it's really revitalized this old industry, this old meat industry. So there's a lot of companies trying to outdo each other in this space. And a lot of consumers can't tell this from the real thing. So maybe this is the future. So we'll talk a little bit more about this type of, or these types of products through the changing consumer lens. So learning objective 1, define the consumer market, and we're going to construct this simple model of consumer buying behavior. So I'd like you to think about, what have you recently purchased that cost over $100? What were the reasons why you purchased this particular item? So just think about this conceptually, like why? Why? What drove you to do that? So if you think about, consumers make many different buying decisions every day, right? And these buying decisions is the focal point of every marketer's efforts, right? So most large companies, their research is around these consumers' buying decisions. And they spend a ginormous amount of money trying to really uncover or answer these questions about what consumers buy, where they buy, how much they buy, when they buy, and why they buy. So when we talk about consumer buying behavior, it's really defined as the buying behavior of the final consumer. You, when you're at the cash register, right? In a Walmart, a Target, etc. Personal consumption goods. Then there's consumer markets. These are made up of all the individuals and households that buy or acquire goods and services for personal. So we have this consumer buying behavior and then consumer markets. So when we think about this, we don't often know exactly why consumers do what they do. And so That's something we're always trying to uncover, those latent needs, the why, and how do we really address them. So the 5.1, so when we look at this model of buying behavior, and just spend some time looking at it. It's very important that you understand it. The environment, the buyer's decision process, and the buyer's response. The central question for marketers is, how do consumers respond to various marketing efforts the company might use? So if I pull certain levers, how are they going to respond to those levers? If I do certain things as a marketer, how do I change the behavior of the consumer or address the behavior? So the starting point is the stimulus response model of the buying behavior shown in this 5.1. So we kind of enter if you look at the stimulus, we enter this black box over here. And marketers must figure out what is in the buyer's black box. We'll talk more about this. So we could spend weeks on this. But again, as I mentioned before, we have to cover so much ground. So it's good to be introduced and look at it. But we will cover it more in depth in the subsequent slides. So learning objective 2. We're going to explore these 4 major factors that influence these consumer buying behaviors. So consumers' purchases, and we'll talk more about these, but if you look at this cultural and social, personal, and psychological, consumers are strongly influenced this, right? This really strongly influences their buying behavior. And so for the most part, we can't control, as marketers, such factors, but we must take them into account. So think about you. We're all consumers. That's what's great. So when we're marketing, we understand, because we understand we're all buyers. We understand what influences our decisions. So we can sort of understand what marketers need to address. So when we think about culture factors, culture is the set of basic values, perception, wants, and behaviors learned by a member of society, right? And so family and other institutions really shape these. And these are broad and deep factors that influence our behavior as consumers. So marketers have to understand the role that these play in the buyer's culture, subculture, and social class. And marketers try to really spot, identify, and get ahead of these cultural shifts, because that's where new products would really fit nicely. So if we think about a cultural shift towards greater concern about health and fitness, right? We've seen that. Sustainability we talked about over the last few weeks. Health and fitness services. Organic foods. So here's an example of these cultural factors and subcultures. So these are the groups of peoples within a culture with shared value systems based on common life experience and situations. So we all can think about these subcultures. So think about what subculture do you belong to? And how does this influence you as a consumer? So McDonald's in Miami, for example, uh, markets a little bit differently, right? So you've got this sort of this macro, and then um, more of a focused approach as it tries to target the different subcultures. So it doesn't mean that you know subcultures often share the characteristics and behaviors of mainstream buying public, but they have distinct differences. So you often see different things on the menu, or just uh, different ways to interact or approach the customers. Right? How do we create that stickiness with the customer? So very interesting if you think about Costa Ricans, Cubans, Argentinians, all these Hispanic economic segments behave slightly different. So you could have subcultures within the subculture. The U.S. Think about the U.S. African American population, very growing, affluence, sophistication. So many products are being developed to appeal to them. So to that market, Asian American consumers are the most affluent U.S. demographic. They are now more than 18 million, with an annual buying power expected to approach 1 billion. Um, that's an older statistic, but that's huge. So think about that as we move forward. Cultural factors. So back to this 5.1 micro influences. And we all have seen this, right? In social systems, members of different classes um, are reared for certain roles and really cannot change their social positions. But in the United States, we have much more flexibility. Social classes are not fixed or rigid, and people typically can move between social classes or drop into a lower one where you don't see that in other countries as much. So we have these micro influencers, and I think most of you are, as we've talked about over the like YouTube and others, many brands now have partners with a larger number of smaller micro influencers, and they're using platforms, TikTok, YouTube, and the like, to really influence target market, kids, um, and various markets. So I want you to think about how can marketers use social networks. You folks are all users of social experience. I mean, social networks. How has that experience been? Has it been effective? If yes, why? If no, why not? There's many examples in the text. Many of you have grown up with it. So I just want you to think about it. Obviously, we can't interact here, but it's good to sort of think about that as you go through these different slides. So, groups and social networks, reference groups, opinion leaders, and we're all familiar with these types of things. Word of mouth influencers. These are really impactful because typically we know somebody or we feel like it's more authentic, right? influencer marketing. We'll talk more about these things, online social networks. And so all of those are really powerful um, influence mechanisms. So P&G did a campaign and continues to do various campaigns to target specifically uh, Black American consumers because, again, becoming much more fluent um, and really want to make help make a positive change. So it's fantastic to see that they're sort of able to do good by doing good. Social factors. So another question, what brands do you purchase because it is what your parents use? Why do you think this occurs, right? Or siblings, right? Who influenced you to sort of because family members can have such a strong influence on your buying behavior, or friends, right? That social that close social network, husband, wife, children. So think about that as we go through these slides. So family is the most important consumer buying organization in society. Role and status. This can be defined by a person's position in a group, right? And we talk a lot about so embracing diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. So many brands and marketers can see the huge shift culturally, and they want to embrace this inclusiveness and leverage it in their product, right? We used to have the Aunt Jemima on the cover, and you can see, I think, at the well, I don't know if you guys are old enough, but there used to be Aunt Jemima, and they felt that it had negative connotations, and there was a big shift to this Pearl Milling Company products, which is basically the same rebranded, which is interesting. So, how do social influences your buying behavior or a buyer's behavior? So, a person's reference groups, when I talked about in the last slide, your reference group, your family, your friends, your social networks, and other influencers strongly affect product and brand choice. The buyer's age, life cycle, stage, occupation, economic position, personality, and other personal characteristics significantly influence the buying decision. Consumer's lifestyle, right? So all of this has a huge impact. And we'll talk about uh, the psychological factors, motivation, perception, learning, and benefits, beliefs, and attitudes. How does your occupation and economic situation affect the goods and services you buy? Typically, your occupation has a significant impact, for obvious reasons, on how you buy and what you buy. Where you're at in life impacts it as well, and clearly your economic situation. A lot of people want to pay less, uh, rent. There's lots of ride sharing, so there's a lot of different approaches. If you look at Target, they put an emphasis on pay less. So clearly, a different approach to marketing, appealing to occupation segments, functional. We see a lot more athletic type wear, I think, on a day to day basis than we used to. So much more utilitarian. It might be the best word for that. Personal factors. So your lifestyle, your pattern of living. So if you think about and your personality, these all are great influencers. So if we talk about uh, psychographics, which measure consumers' AIOs, activities, interests, and opinions, they typically capture this information about a person's pattern of acting and interacting in the environment. So if somebody's very outdoorsy, likes to do rock climbing or skateboarding in this for this in this instance, excuse me, it's obviously you target people differently. A brand has a personality, and this brand's personality is a specific mix of human traits that may be attributed to a particular brand. And that's what they're trying to do with this Vans. It's a lifestyle. And there's many other brands that sort of have this type of approach. So we'll talk a little bit more about brand personality. So Ford tries to do this as well, right? With the F-Series pickup truck. It positions itself in the market on toughness, on resilience, on conveying this durability. So it really, if you think about personality traits, researchers have identified 5 brand personality traits. Sincerity, so this down-to-earth honesty, wholesome and cheerful. Excitement, daring, spirited, imaginative, and up-to-date. Competence, reliable, intelligent, and successful. Sophistication, glamorous, and ruggedness. So let's look at this following psychological factors. Motivation. So motive is this drive. It's the drive or need that is sufficiently passing to direct the person to seek a satisfaction of the need. Perception is the process by which people select, organize, or interpret information to form a meaningful picture of the world. And learning is changes in an individual's behavior arising from experience. And beliefs and attitudes are difficult to change. I mean, you just have to think about it that way. Here's an ad about subliminal advertising, and it's saying, hey, it doesn't exist. So I think it's a play on beliefs and attitudes. Psychological factors continued here. We talked a little bit about motive, and some marketers dismiss motivation research as mumbo jumbo, but many marketers believe that it's real and needs to be leveraged. Some use touchy-feely approaches called interpretive consumer research to really dig deep into the psyche of the consumer. and they used this qualitative research really to probe into latent or hidden subconscious motivations. I think everyone's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, he never put it in a pyramid that I'm aware of, but studying and having studied motivation for many years, especially in the sales space, but if you think about, and I really like this from a motivational perspective, understanding that you move up, and it's really, again, you can move in and out of these um, all the time. Hopefully, you don't have to worry about these lower order needs, security, you know, food, water, those types of things. So you can work on these higher order needs. But most of us are trying to self-actualize. I mean, that's what we're allowed to do because we're not worried about these uh, lower order needs. So if you watched some sort of TV last night, whether it was on, I don't want to say TV, but if you watched a show last night and you saw a commercial, do you recall what commercial or what ad that was? Do you remember seeing what ad that was? So perception is this process by which people select, organize, and interpret this information to form a meaningful picture of the world. Right? So we have this meaning, the motivated person is ready to act. How this person acts is influenced by that perception. All of us learn by the flow of information through our senses, right? And we know we've got these sight, hearing, smell, touch, and taste. But the sensory information is interpreted in an individual way. So we've got this selective attention, selective distortion, selective retention. So selective attention is the tendency for people to screen out most of the information to which they are exposed. Selective distortion is the tendency for people to interpret information in a way that will support what they already believe. And selective retention is the tendency to remember good points about the brand and forget good points made about competing brands. So marketers work really hard because of the selective attention, distortion, retention. It's hard to get your message through, so it's really difficult. But you've got to remember these things and work through them. There's this thing called the ladder of inferences, and with mental models, and this plays really nicely with it. So Peter Senge, if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he did a lot in systems thinking. Um, wrote this piece on ladders of inferences, and it's pretty cool. But it's about how we take in information and support. We pretty much only take information that reinforces our mental models, and we discard information that doesn't. And so it's really hard to change somebody's mind, and it really explains the difficulty, and that's what marketers are trying to do. especially our really held beliefs, closely held beliefs, it's very hard to change. Again, we're continuing psychological factors. So if we think about learning, it's the change of an individual's behavior arising from experience and occurs through the interplay of drives. And a drive is this internal stimulus we talked about, a call for action. And it becomes this motive, right? Stimuli. And cues. And cues are this minor stimuli that determines when, where, and how the person responds. So for instance, the person might spot several camera brands in the shop window, hear of a sale price, or discuss cameras with a friend. These are all cues that might influence a consumer's response to buy the product. And reinforcement. So I want you to think about, as we go through this slide, how a belief you hold influenced your purchasing decision. So a belief is this descriptive thought that you have about something that's based on your knowledge, your opinion, your faith, right? And it's an attitude which describes this person's or your relatively consistent evaluation, feeling, and tendency towards an object or idea. So as marketers, we're interested in the beliefs that people formulate about specific products and or services because these beliefs make up a product and brand's image that affect buying behavior. So think about an image about Harley Davidson or whatever comes to mind, right? Or fast food, McDonald's, or if some of the beliefs are wrong and prevent purchase, right? We had a huge, back in the day, for example, people were saying certain things about McDonald's meat, so they made a huge shift to make sure that the people understood the meat was 100% grade A, ground beef, etc. So they launched a campaign to correct that image, etc. So marketers have to do that. Spanx. So Sarah Blakely, she's changed the way consumers think about clothing and the shapes. So they talk about it's not just foundation wear anymore. It's shapewear. And I've heard people talk about these Spanx. And I don't have them, but I'm sure you folks are, excuse me, I'm messing with a cold here. But it's really changed consumers' attitudes about clothing and body shapes and really the foundation. So we want to understand the stages. So we'll talk about the stages in the decision-making process. So the buying process starts long before the actual purchasing and really continues long after. In fact, it might be result in a decision not to buy, right? So marketers must, if we think about, must focus on this entire process, not just the purchase decision. Now, though it looks linear, etc., you may come in, go out of this, and then come back into this. So, and you may spend much more time in certain buckets of this process. So you got to think about it that way. I mean, you want to move them as quick as you can to the purchasing decision, right? But it really depends on what product is, etc. So if we think about, so some purchases are simple, routine, even habitual. Others are far more complex. So my space is mostly OEM, and I don't deal with the end user. We've been talking a lot about that. So when I market to the B2B world, and I sell to the B2B world, excuse me. And so my whole space is much more complex. The buying behavior is more complex. So it's much more extensive, much more longer. But there are always fundamentals that straddle simple and routine and the complex buying. So we'll talk more about this complex and the dissonance reducing buying behavior and the habitual buying behavior, variety seeking buying behavior. So this is the 5.5 describes these four types. So obviously, if you're buying a tube of toothpaste, now some of us might go and spend a lot of time on that tube of toothpaste, but it's probably different in terms of how you behave than it is when you buy financial services. And that's probably different than when you buy a smartphone or a new car. I can tell you that my boss would say, just give me the smartphone, but he'd spend a lot of time on financial services. I can tell you that I know people that spend more time probably on the tube of toothpaste. But generally speaking, and the point of the slide is to talk about, the difference between complex. So it's a high involvement. There's a ton of variety, right? You can buy so many different varieties of toothpaste. And typically there's very people typically buy the same brand or don't deviate too much from them. If they buy Crest, they typically always buy Crest. But if we think about someone buying a new car, you're typically going to do full on information gathering, brand evaluation process. But then at the other end of the spectrum, this low information, you may just simply select a familiar brand out of habit. So think about the brand of toothpaste you buy and why. Why do you buy it? Just do that real quick. So we've got a few more slides left. Need negotiation. This may occur because of an advertisement or discussion with a friend. And you get to thinking about buying a new car, right? You get that itch and you go, well, this would be cool if I had that car. We talked about maybe getting the Q7 or That Escalade would be a better fit for the family or something like that. This is the stage where the marketer should research consumers to find out what kinds of needs or problems arise, what brought them about, and how they lead the consumer to this particular product. So it's the first stage of the buyer's decision process in which the consumer recognizes a problem or need triggered by this internal stimuli we talked about earlier. This external stimuli, and then so when we talk about the stimuli, an interested consumer may or may not search for information. So if we think about if the consumer's drive is strong and satisfying, and a satisfying product is near or at hand, maybe he or she is likely to buy it, right? If not, the consumer may store the need in a memory or undertake an information search that's related to that need. So let's think about that. So if you decided, going back to this new car thing, right, you would probably pay more attention to car ads if you were looking for a new car. Maybe pay attention to cars owned by your friends. And be more engaged in car conversations. You'd actively probably search the web, talk with friends, gather information other ways. But traditionally, consumers receive the most information about product from commercial sources, those that are controlled by the marketer. The most effective sources, I guess they tend to be personal, right? But they inform the buyer. They legitimize and evaluate products for the buyer. They sort of give you that information you need and make you justify that decision. So we just talked about this. I apologize. I kind of went fast. So evaluation of alternative. So once consumers arrive at a set of alternatives, they start in the buyer decision process. They start to evaluate alternatives, right? So I get my eyes set on a BMW. Maybe I'm going to look at other German manufacturers. So how consumers go about evaluating purchase alternatives depends on the individual consumer, and that's specific. So it's very situational. The evaluation may involve careful calculations and logical thinking. Purchase decision. Once the evaluation is complete, the consumer's purchase decision will generally be to buy the most preferred brand. Preferences, even purchase intentions, do not always result in an actual purchase. The purchase intention may not be the purchase decisions due to the attitude of others, unexpected situational factors. Post-purchase behavior. So the marketer's job doesn't end when the product is bought. So we think about after the purchase of the product, the consumer will either be satisfied or dissatisfied and will start to engage in this post-purchase behavior. And that is very interesting to us marketers. So what determines whether the buyer is satisfied or dissatisfied with the purchase? The answer
lies in the relationship between the consumer's expectations and the product's perceived performance. I'm going to say it again, it's very important. The answer lies in the relationship between the consumer's expectations and the product's perceived performance. So, continuing this post purchase behavior. So, we think about post purchase cognitive dissonance, right? We're all familiar with that, I hope. No matter what choice they make, consumers feel at least some post purchase dissonance for every decision, right? So almost all major purchases, however, result in this dissonance. We have this post purchase conflict with ourselves. So we need to make sure that after the purchase, consumers are satisfied with the benefits of that chosen brand. We want to relieve as much dissonance as possible as marketers. So consumers don't, we want to really make sure that consumers feel, so they don't feel uneasy about acquiring uh, the drawbacks of the chosen brand and about losing the benefits of the brand's not purchase. And so they always feel like, hey, I didn't get what that other brand had. And so had I purchased that, I would have received that, and I didn't get that. So marketers should work to alleviate this discomfort by reinforcing the benefits of the chosen brand. We want to alleviate that dissonance, right? How do we delight the customer? So the customer journey, right? It's the sum of ongoing experiences that consumers have with the brand. And remember, it's not about just I purchase it, it's over. It's that post journey as well. How do we continue to engage over that brand over time? So they collect a portfolio of these brand experiences that consumers have with a certain brand. And it's really about that relationship that one builds. So you think about, as marketers, how can we work to create these brand experiences that will continue to result in a positive purchase behavior, this positive engagement, and will create brand efficacy over time? That's what our job is. So, why must marketers understand the customer journey? The sum of ongoing experiences that consumers have with their brand is paramount. By understanding this journey, marketers can work to create brand experiences that result in positive purchase behavior, engagement, and advocacy over time. The digital world provides a wealth of opportunities to enhance that customer journey at different points in time and space. So let's describe the adoption and diffusion process for new products. A new product, if we think about a new product, it's a good or service or idea that is perceived by some potential customer as new. The adoption process is this mental process as individuals go through from learning about an innovation to final regular use. Stages in the adoption process include awareness. So the customer becomes aware of the new product, but pretty much lacks information about it. Interest. The consumer seeks out information about the product. Evaluation. The consumer considers whether trying the new product makes sense. Trial. The consumer tries the new product on a small scale to improve his or her estimate of its value. And finally, adoption. The consumer decides whether to make full and regular use of the new product. So here's L'Oreal has an example. It's invested deeply in technologies that make a customer's journey as full and fulfilling as possible. So individual differences in innovativeness, right? People differ greatly in their readiness to try new products. So we have innovators, early adopters. We'll talk about this in the next slide. Early mainstream, late mainstream, lagging adopters. So innovators, they try the. You can see this bell curve here. Innovators, they try new ideas at some risk. Early adopters, they are typically opinion leaders in the communities and adopt new, but are pretty careful. Mainstream, they're deliberate. You can see them here. They're rarely leaders. They adopt new ideas before the average person. Then we got laggards, late mainstreamers. They are pretty suspicious about changes and adopt the innovation only when it has become something of tradition itself. So, relative advantage, this is the degree to which the innovation appears superior to existing products. Compatibility is the degree to which the innovation fits the values and experiences of potential consumers. Complexity, this is really the degree to which the innovation is difficult for people to understand or use. Trialability is really how people use the product, right? How easy is it for them to use? Observability. Can they see how valued the product is, how well it works, etc.? So it's kind of like